the Penguins took care of some nice piece of business with Valtteri Puustinen on Friday, and Pat and I are going to give our thoughts on that signing right after this.
You're Locked On Penguins, your daily podcast on the Pittsburgh Penguins, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, welcome back to another episode of the Locked On Penguins podcast. I am one of your hosts, Hunter Hodes. You can follow me on Twitter at Hunter Hodes. Joined by my co-host, Patrick Damp. You can follow him on Twitter at Synonym for Wet, and you can follow the show's Twitter at LO_Penguins. Of course, thank you all so much for making this your first listen/watch of the day. We are free and available on all platforms. And finally, today's episode is brought to you by Indeed. There is no I in team, but there is one in Indeed, and that's the hiring platform you need to build yours. Start hiring now with a $75 sponsored job credit to upgrade your job post at Indeed.com/lockedon. Terms and conditions apply. If you need to hire, you need Indeed. And just before we get to the Valtteri Puustinen news, Pat and I made a small boo-boo during our episode on Thursday. Brayden Yager, he will not be eligible to start next season in the AHL because he will not be 20 by that time. He would have had to be 20 at that time. And since he's going to be 19, it's either going to be the NHL for Brayden Yager or he's going to have to go back to his junior team. And I think Pat and I are both in agreement that him going back to his junior team is best suited, I think, for him, unless he fully blows everyone away at training camp. But just wanted to put that out there for everyone because, yes, we did make a small little error and we apologize about that. But getting into the big news for the day here, the Penguins have re-signed Valtteri Puustinen to a 2-year deal, and he's going to be making less than $800K against the cap, only $775,000 at the NHL level. Honestly, man, that's a steal if Puustinen becomes even better for this team next year, and I do think he is going to be better next year. This season, 5 goals, 20 points in 52 games, so a little less than half a point per game. I liked what he did when he first came up, though he did fizzle out. That led to him. At least that's part of the reason why I think he went down for a couple of weeks, but then he comes back up and was easily the best of the players from Wilkes-Barre that came up this year. Yeah, you can make an argument for Jackson Ivany, especially during the late stages of the season. I do think he's going to be on this team next year, but forward-wise especially, Puustinen was the best of the forwards that came up. He looked pretty decent, I think, in the top 6 at times, but I think his best games were when he was on the third line with Lars Eller and Riley Smith. I love Puustinen's shot. I think he's really silky with the puck on his stick. He can also defend at least okay in his own zone. And this is someone, to me, that I think should be in the lineup on a full-time basis for next season, all 82 games. I don't think he has anything left to learn at Wilkes-Barre for next year. And I think this is a player, after having 5 goals this year, he can definitely go into the double digits for next year, especially if they can get someone to help him on the third line, maybe a third line center that provides a little more offense. We kind of discussed that a little bit earlier this week. If the Penguins can go out there and get that type of player, I think that's going to really unlock Puustinen even more. Really nice piece of business from Kyle Dubas here. No complaints about this deal.
This is a very solid deal for Valtteri Puustinen, all things considered. Now, I don't want to sit here and pretend like you and I are talking him up to be the next great superstar to come in for the Pittsburgh Penguins, because he very much is not. But this is kind of where you want to be right now as an organization. It fits into a lot of what we've heard from Kyle Dubas about how he wants this team to get younger and get faster so they can continue to be competitive in the final days of this Penguins core. Now, let's also keep this in mind. He didn't exactly earn a big raise. He did fairly well, all things considered, but the expectations weren't high. Now there are actual expectations. He is going to be looked at as somebody who should contribute at the NHL level for the entire season. This cannot be another up and down kind of year for him. He has to solidify himself as a full-time NHLer. And if you get 10, 15 goals out of him, he's doing the role that he's being signed to play. And if you look at what he's done in the AHL, like you said, I don't think there's a lot left for him to prove there, because there were 2 seasons where he led the Wilkes-Barre Scranton Penguins in points. So he's been a solid AHL contributor. Now he has to take the next step and become a regular NHL player. And in 2 years, maybe we talk about him being even more of a contributor for the Pittsburgh Penguins, should he continue to develop the way that we see him developing right now.
Agreed. And he's a good option for the bottom 6 in general. And I also like how Kyle Dubas, and it looks like the front office and the coaching staff, at least right now, I know we're really early in the offseason, but it's nice that they are prioritizing speed, skill, and at least some youth for that bottom 6, just because I felt like those bottom 2 lines were really lacking in all 3 areas this year. And by getting Puustinen done and out of the way, I think this bodes well for other moves that they can make for that unit this offseason, where they are prioritizing all 3 of those things that I just said. Because if this team wants to run 4 lines, they got to get all 3 of those things and have a bottom 6 that can help out the top 6 on nights where they just don't have it.
For sure. And, you know, we're going to talk about in the 3rd segment today a great anniversary in Penguins history. And that's something that happened during the 2016 Stanley Cup run. I'm not going to spoil it for people, but the diehards know. But you look back at that 2016 and 2017 run. Yes, the big guns, the veterans, so to speak, drove the bus. But there were a lot of young, fast, hungry players up and down that lineup looking to make their mark in the National Hockey League. And for the Penguins to squeeze one more run out of this core, they are going to need a lot more young, fast, hungry players ready to prove themselves. And we saw that in spurts from Valtteri Puustinen this season, especially down the stretch and into the end of the season. Now we need to see that for a full season. He needs to continue to use his speed. He needs to continue to make smart decisions with the puck. And most importantly, he needs to use his shot, because we saw flashes of it this year. When he gets some space and he gets some time, that kid can fire the pill. And we need him to do that a lot more next season.
Just look at the Islanders games from this year. I mean, I think a couple of his best goals from this season were against the Islanders. I mean, those were wicked shots. I think he has, when you look at this team overall, I think he does have one of the better releases on this team. And I want to see him use that to his advantage a little bit more for next season. I think he will. I think realistic expectations for him next year, 12, 13, 14 goals. I really don't think that's a hot take or out of the realm of possibilities or anything like that, especially if they're able to improve the bottom 6 in general. But this is a move I make every single time, and I'm really happy about it overall. But I think that would do it for this first segment, unless you had anything else to add about the next season.
The one last thing I wanted to add kind of builds upon that young, hungry player wanting to prove himself. I think he also needs to show that he can be a top 6 option, not a permanent one. We don't need him to become the winger for Sid or the winger for Gino, but he needs to show that he has that utility. He needs to show that, hey, maybe we've got some injuries in the top 6, or God forbid, again, we have guys in the top 6 who go cold for long stretches. He needs to make himself an option for Mike Sullivan to go up to the first or second line for 2 or 3 weeks. And in that time, he produces, or at the very least, he's not a net negative. Because I think when he started to slow down before he got sent back down to Wilkes-Barre around the middle of the season, he wasn't playing poorly, but he wasn't really a net positive wherever they put him in the lineup. That needs to change this year. And I think with the experience he got throughout the rest of this season and the way he performed down the stretch, I think he's found his game with room to grow. But the most important thing to me going into next season is show that if guys go cold or guys get hurt in the top 6, Puustinen's sitting right there and is a viable option to play on those lines.
Agreed. I think best case scenario, he is on this team's 3rd line for next season, but I agree with you. I think he definitely has more room to go where he can be an option in the top 6, kind of like how Drew O'Connor was towards the late stages of the season, and how he did look like a pretty good fit on Crosby's wing. But again, I still in a perfect world would like O'Connor to slide down the lineup a little bit. And speaking of Puustinen with Malkin, they had almost 200 minutes of 5-on-5 ice time this season. And in those minutes together, when they were on the ice, almost 52% of the shot attempts, 8 goals for, 9 goals against. So almost 500 there, but 54% of the scoring chances, 66% of the high danger chances, 4 high danger goals for, so 6 high danger goals against. So some good numbers, some meh numbers, but if you can build on a couple of those while maintaining, for example, the number with high danger chances for or shot attempts for and even scoring chances, if you can maintain those while get your high danger goals for percentage up, that's, I think, going to make Sullivan trust Puustinen a bit more, where he can maybe put him up there with Malkin's line in case, someone like, God forbid, Bunting gets hurt, or if Raquel gets hurt, if Raquel gets moved over the offseason, he could still be a potential option for that line. So they at least, Pat, have some history of playing together, even though I know it's not even 200 minutes, but the numbers are still at least okay overall. Still room to grow, I think, is the best way to say it. But I think that'll do it for this first segment. Coming up in the second segment, Sheldon Keefe has been fired as the head coach of the Toronto Maple Leafs. Will the Penguins go after him to have him be on the bench? Well, Pat and I are going to give our thoughts on that and whether it would even make sense for the Penguins to do that. But before we get to that, we got to tell you all about our first sponsor for the day, and that is Policy Genius. It is the country's leading online insurance marketplace. It saves you time and money so you can provide your family with a financial safety net starting today. With Policy Genius, you can find life insurance policies that start at just $292 per year for $1 million of coverage. Some options offer same-day approval and avoid unnecessary medical exams. It helps you compare your options from top companies, and their team of licensed experts is on hand to help talk you through it. You can also talk to a winning team of award-winning agents who will walk you through the process step by step. You can also easily compare quotes from America's top insurers in just a few clicks to find your lowest price. Your work-life insurance policy may not offer enough protection for your family's needs. Even worse, it may not even come with you if you leave your job. They give you unbiased advice from a licensed expert support team. They have no incentive to recommend one insurer over another, so you can trust their guidance. Check life insurance off your to-do list in no time with Policy Genius. Head to policygenius.com/lockedonnhl or click the link in the description to get your free life insurance quotes and see how much you could save. That's policygenius.com/lockedonnhl. All right, we're back here in this episode of the Locked On Penguins podcast. I am one of your hosts, Hunter Hodes, joined by my co-host, Patrick Damp. So, Pat, it's the question that I know a lot of Penguins fans and media members and everyone surrounding this team want an answer to. Will Sheldon Keefe be on the Penguins bench for next season? He was fired by the Maple Leafs this week after yet another first-round exit, as the Maple Leafs have only won one playoff series in the last 8 seasons that they have had this core for in Toronto. Very unacceptable. I know I love to use the word unacceptable on this show. One playoff series in 8 years, yeah, that does not cut it, especially in a market like Toronto. But Keefe, he is now looking for his next gig. We did get a report from Pierre LeBrun saying that the New Jersey Devils have sought permission. They've also been granted permission to speak to Keefe about their head coach opening. They've been talking, it feels like, to a lot of people. I think Jay Woodcroft has been connected to that job. Craig Berube has been connected to that job. But Craig Berube, I think, has been connected to basically every job at this point. But with the Dubas connection, especially to Sheldon Keefe, there's going to be some talk about him potentially coming to the Penguins. Where I stand on that is I would really not be that big of a fan of it. I don't think Keefe is that good of a coach. I've seen what he's done in the playoffs over the last few seasons, only won one playoff series during that time. If you look at his record also in the playoffs, 16-21 in 37 playoff games. That's not good enough. Yeah, sure, he's led the Maple Leafs to a bunch of top 3 finishes in the Atlantic Division, but they really haven't done anything with those once the playoffs come. And I think the biggest reason why the Leafs have not gone that far is because they really can't score in the playoffs. I think that's been their biggest issue the last few years. And if you add into the staff, is an upgrade over Todd Reirden? Maybe a little bit, but the Leafs power play was also not good in the playoffs this year. And if you add him to the staff, that I think puts even more pressure on Mike Sullivan. And I know I have been very on the train of I wouldn't bring back Mike Sullivan for this season. I know you have kind of been there too. I know other people have as well. But I would still rather have Mike Sullivan coach this team than Sheldon Keefe. And the thought of Keefe taking over for Sullivan if things were to go wrong really scares me. So on that alone, I'm just really not that interested.
See, I'm with you in that I don't think he's a good addition to the NHL staff. Like you said, there's a lot of red flags there with everything that's happened with the Toronto Maple Leafs for the past few years. Some of it I don't think you can put squarely on his shoulders. I think that core of players at this point, I think it's safe to say we can admit they get the yips when it comes to the postseason, because you saw it in their press conference today. They talked about, oh, we need to, do the unsexy things with this roster when it comes to the playoffs. You guys spent the better part of a decade getting your team to play the right way in the playoffs, and you still lost 2-1 games. So maybe it's not an issue of being able to play complete 200-foot hockey. You can't score. But then back to the Sheldon Keefe of it all. If, let's say, the rest of this offseason passes and all of the teams with vacancies at head coach position right now pass on Sheldon Keefe, or Sheldon Keefe says thanks but no thanks, if I'm Kyle Dubas, I might reach out to him if they don't have somebody ready for the Wilkes-Barre Scranton Penguins, because he has a tremendous track record of success in the American Hockey League. And you look at a lot of the key contributors for the Toronto Maple Leafs over the past 5 or 6 years, well, probably a little more than that, because he began his time with the Marlies in 15-16 in the AHL. He helped develop a lot of those guys. He had them playing meaningful hockey. He won a Calder Cup with the Toronto Marlies in the AHL. And maybe that's where Sheldon Keefe's bread is buttered, because he also had plenty of success in the OHL. Now, again, he got haunted by the same demons as he did in Toronto that he did in the OHL, where he'd take his team to the playoffs and not be able to finish the job, albeit he got to the second and third rounds. But it really feels like this guy's strength is working with younger players, working with fringe NHL players, and getting them ready for the next level. He's maybe not the guy that you bring in to win a Stanley Cup, but what he does helps your organization get closer to a Stanley Cup in developing the players you have in your system to make them NHL ready.
See, I get what you're saying, but part of me also feels like he would be overqualified for that type of job in Wilkes-Barre. And then it goes back to what I was saying before. If he takes that job in Wilkes-Barre, he is still what's the word I'm looking for? Heir apparent to Mike Sullivan. Because remember, that's how Sullivan took over for Mike Johnston all those eons ago. They promoted him from Wilkes-Barre to the Penguins head coach. So there's still going to be pressure on Sullivan if you bring Keefe in to coach Wilkes-Barre. Yeah, I think it makes sense from a Wilkes-Barre perspective because you want to develop more of these young players. They're really serious about getting Wilkes-Barre, I guess, fully back to playoff contention, just because last few years just hasn't been the greatest overall. So that aspect, it makes sense to bring Keefe in. But again, I still think there's a lot of pressure on Sullivan, and I just think Keefe is going to be overqualified if he gets that gig. Not to mention he's already getting interest from NHL teams, namely the Devils, according to Pierre LeBrun, and I think that list is only going to grow. I really don't think he's going to take an AHL gig, even though he just got canned from the Maple Leafs. I know you have the Kyle Dubas connection here in Pittsburgh, but I still think his next gig is going to be in the NHL. And sure, this will be his second NHL coaching gig if he gets a head coaching gig. And while you really get to see what that coach is made of during that time, I'm not sure if I were the Penguins, I would really want to take that risk, just because he really didn't adjust to what other teams are doing in playoff series. Yeah, he had a lot of regular season wins, but it just, again, didn't really count in the playoffs. But that's where I just kind of push back a little bit with you. I know I'm probably putting out a bunch of word salad overall, but that's where I guess I push back a little bit, just because I think he's looking at an NHL gig, not an AHL gig.
I don't disagree with what you're saying. What I will counter with, though, is this real quick. One, Sullivan needs to feel some pressure, I think, given what's gone on with the organization. Do I lay the losses on at his feet? No. I mean, if I were, it's the old meme. If I were the coach, I simply would tell my goalie to play better, because I think a lot of the team's failings over the past 5-6 years have landed squarely at the feet of goaltending more than anything. And, you can be the best coach in the world. If your goalie's not making saves, who cares what system you've put in place? And then on the other end of it, he's overqualified for an AHL job. Yeah, sure, maybe. But what's wrong with being overqualified? Do you not want your organization to be an embarrassment of riches? Yeah, he's probably no longer an AHL head coach. He's probably an NHL head coach. And I agree that with all the openings that still remain across the league, he's probably a top tier candidate and is likely going to land in one of those jobs. But should he not, at that point, give him a call and see if he's interested. Because the other thing is, he was set to start a 2-year extension with the Toronto Maple Leafs starting this year. So if he doesn't get any of those jobs, he's well within his rights to sit at home with his family for 2 years, collect a paycheck from MLSE, and go about his merry way. But overall, I mean, I don't think it's a bad thing to put some heat on Mike Sullivan going into next season. And if you got a guy who's overqualified, but he's got the willingness to do the job, take him.
I hear you. And I do agree that Sullivan, considering they're going to keep him heading into next season, he should feel quite a bit of pressure heading into 2024, 2025. But I think you need to bring in the right assistant coach to provide that pressure. And it's why I'm so hell-bent on maybe bringing in someone like Jay Woodcroft if he doesn't get any of these coaching jobs. Again, I know he's been connected to New Jersey and he could get hired there, but that's someone I would love to bring in for multiple reasons. But one that you said, it would definitely put pressure on Sullivan just because he was really successful in Edmonton before getting canned earlier this year. And I don't think he was the main reason why the Oilers were stinking it up. But that's someone who, again, I would love to bring in. And I think that's the right coach that could provide pressure. I think it's right to give Sullivan some pressure, but you got to bring in the right coach for it, I think is what I'm trying to say.
For sure.
But yeah, I think that'll do it for this second segment of today's episode. Coming up to end the show, we're going to do something for Feel Good Friday, if you will. And 8 years ago today, Nick Bonino became a legend in Pittsburgh with that amazing overtime winner against the Washington Capitals. Pat and I are going to reminisce on that just a little bit to end today's show. But before we get to that, we got to tell you all about our next sponsor, and that is Indeed. There is no I in team, but there is one in Indeed. And that's the hiring platform you need to build yours. When you're hiring, you need Indeed. Indeed is the hiring platform where you can attract, interview, and hire all in one place. Instead of spending hours on multiple job sites searching for candidates with the right skills, Indeed's powerful hiring platform can help you do it all. They streamline hiring with powerful tools that help you match candidates. And with Instant Match, over 80% of employers get quality candidates whose resumes on Indeed matches their job description the moment they sponsor a job, according to Indeed data overall. Even better, Indeed's the only job site where you can only pay for applications that meet your must-have requirements. Indeed is an unbelievably powerful hiring platform, delivering 4 times more hires than all other job sites combined, according to Talent Nest 2019. Join more than 3 million businesses worldwide that use Indeed to hire great talent fast. Start hiring now with a $75 sponsored job credit to upgrade your job post at Indeed.com/lockedon. Offer is good only for a limited time. Again, claim your $75 credit right now at Indeed.com/lockedon. One more time, Indeed.com/lockedon. Terms and conditions apply. If you need to hire, you need Indeed. All right, we're back here on this episode of the Locked On Penguins podcast. I am one of your hosts, Hunter Hodes, joined by my co-host, Patrick Tamp. So, Pat, what happened 8 years ago today? Can you tell the audience what happened?
Bonino, Nick Bonino.
That call will forever live in my head. I could listen to that 500 times a day, and I would never get tired of it. But yes, Nick Bonino became a folk hero, a legend, whatever word you want to call it, on May 10th, 2016. And by the way, it is insane that it has been 8 years since that goal. 2 more years, it's going to be a decade since Nick Bonino scored that goal. I was a senior in high school that year. I'm 26 right now, going to be 27 this year. It is disturbing how fast time has gone. But
you are a child. You are a child.
I know I am. It's okay. It's gross that I'm getting scared about turning 30, but whatever. It's going to be here before I know it. I'm going to be disgusted about it. But with Nick Bonino, that game overall had such swings of emotions. You think the Penguins are going to cruise to a win. They're up by multiple goals, and then the Capitals come storming back, especially in the third period with, you take a delay of game penalty. No, you take another penalty. No, you take a delay of game penalty. It was just a comedy of errors from the Penguins in that third period. It goes to overtime, and the Penguins are dominating that overtime. They're getting chance after chance. Somehow the puck is not going in the back of the net, and I'm thinking at that time, God forbid, are the Capitals going to get a stupid goal off someone's butt, skate, whatever? Nope. Nick Bonino becomes the hero, sends the Penguins to the Eastern Conference Final against Tampa Bay Lightning before they beat the Lightning in 7 games, and then they beat the San Jose Sharks in the final that year. But what a game that was overall. I remember going into high school the next day and just giving it to the Caps. They were trying to get on me before that series saying, oh, you guys don't want it. You guys don't want it. They obviously won game 1. And I told them after game 1, just wait, because this team is coming. They win game 2, and I go up to them after. I said, yeah, it's a series now. And then all I had to do after that Bonino winner was go up to them and smile and just say, yeah, I hope you really enjoyed getting your butts whooped in that series. But this is a day that will forever live in Penguins history. Just an amazing goal. What do you remember from that game and just this day overall?
I don't think for the final 10 minutes of the third period and then all the way through Bonino's goal, because this was when I was still working for the Wheeling Nailers. I had a nice little apartment down there in Wheeling, and I don't think I sat down at all from the final 10 minutes of that game until Bonino's winner. I was just pacing back and forth, yelling at my TV and going through the entire swing of emotion. But there's one thing, and I had to go back to remember who said this, because it wasn't one of the core players. It wasn't one of the big guns. But if you remember that year, this is the year that in December, they can Mike Johnston, Mike Sullivan takes over. They go on this magical run. Ben Lovejoy had the quote of the postseason after that game. And his press conference after the game, because you remember this is the point of the playoffs where they don't go into the locker room anymore. They bring guys out and they sit down at a podium or a table or whatever and talk to all the reporters there. Ben Lovejoy said one sentence, and it was incredibly accurate and just great. He says, the first half of the season, Penguins would have found a way to lose that game. And he was not wrong, because if you remember, under Mike Johnston's entire tenure as Penguins head coach, they never had a comeback win. His entire tenure as coach, they never came back from any deficit to win a game. So that was the biggest hallmark of Mike Sullivan taking over, was that this team was never out of a game. And when you had something crazy like a blown 3-0 lead with all of those delay of game penalties, the fact that that team pulled themselves up and won, I think that was the moment at the end of that series when I went, yeah, this team is winning the Stanley Cup.
And the way they didn't seem phased to start overtime, because you expect the Capitals to have all the juice to start that overtime. Oh, we just came back to tie the game. We can do this. We can send this series back to Washington for a decisive game 7. They barely even had the puck, it felt like, in that overtime. They had it a little bit, but the Penguins were getting chance after chance after chance before Bonino finally won it. And
then that always makes me think of, because this is obviously the next year, but that resolve of that team, I think, was summed up in 2017 in the Game 7 against Ottawa in the Eastern Conference Final during the Showtime show, Quest for the Stanley Cup, All Access, which those are all on YouTube. Go check them out. They're awesome. But before, I think it's the second or third overtime, they have Ian Cole mic'd up. and he's walking to go see a trainer or go to the bathroom, whatever he's going to do. They have him mic'd up and he walks past the cameras. He's like, I got nothing going on, boys. Play all night if we have to.
Yep.
And I was just like, I love this team.
Yep. I remember that quote as well. I think the Penguins Twitter posted that actually in 2016. And I remember watching it and I'm like, yep, just inject that right here, right into my veins, please. But that team was so fun. I miss that team all the time. I can't wait for the day when, that entire team, like with how they honored the 2009 team overall, I can't wait until that team is fully brought back and is honored at PPG Paints.
I was at the game in 2019 against Chicago where they did the 10-year anniversary of the 2009 Cup, and man, like and I know we're doing this for a Feel Good Friday. Like, you don't realize, man, and you especially specifically, you're gonna realize how fast time moves now that you're into your late 20s. But like, I remember sitting there at PPG Paints Arena and being like, how the hell was this 10 years ago? I swear to God, I remember, because so you brought up the high school story. I'll bring up a quick one real quick. Penguins winning in 2009. That was my senior year of high school. And I wore a Crosby jersey under my cap and gown for graduation because they won the Stanley Cup the day after I graduated high school. So like, I would have pictures with like friends and we're all wearing Pens gear and stuff and getting ready for Game 7 against Detroit. And then the next night they go out and win the Stanley Cup. But like, yeah, I mean, the Bonino goal in 2016, like, again, to put a fine point on it, like, that was the moment I think I, again, realized is like, yeah, this team, they have it. They're going to win the Stanley Cup.
It's funny you bring up your graduation. The Penguins won the 2016 Stanley Cup on my high school graduation night, June 12th, 2016. And I wasn't allowed to have my phone at the graduation. It pissed me off. I was royally full on pissed. And I remember coming off the stage after I got my diploma, and I knew where my family was in the crowd. And my grandpa, who was there, he mouthed to me 1-0. And I said, Pittsburgh? And he goes, yes. And I put a huge fist pump in my air. So that's something I'll always remember as well. It's funny how we're pretty similar with graduations of the Penguins winning the Stanley Cup. But yeah, just a great day in franchise history and something that, again, I'll remember for the rest of my life. And yeah, it's going to be awesome seeing the 2016 team come back in a couple years for the 10-year anniversary, because I imagine they're going to do something for that pattern. The same thing for the 2017 team in 2027. But I think that will do it for this discussion. Real quickly before we end the episode, a little bit of playoff talk. I'm stunned by this Carolina-New York series, man. I cannot believe the Rangers are up 3-0. These games have been decided by the slimmest of margins, but Carolina's special teams stink right now. They're not getting anything from their power play. They're not getting anything from their penalty kill. Poor Jake Gensel is lighting up the Rangers like he always does. I mean, this goes back to a couple years ago where he was destroying the Rangers in that series. He loves playing them in the playoffs, but outside of him and Svechnikov, no one is doing anything for the Hurricanes in this series. To quote my good buddy Nick Zararis, this is like the Big Ten, and I'll add to that. This is like Ohio State versus Penn State. That's what this is. And then for another series, Dallas, Colorado, that's Alabama, Georgia right there. That is two insane teams trading blow for blow with one another. But I can't even believe I'm sitting here right now looking at the Canes potentially getting swept. And there could be some serious changes there this summer if they get swept.
Yeah, great column this morning in The Athletic from Mark Lazarus about the Carolina Hurricanes. You know, I think this is definitely a team that, you know, everyone's made their jokes about the Maple Leafs saying, oh, we're right there. We're right there. And everyone's like, guys, you can't win a series. You're not right there. The Carolina Hurricanes are right there, but something is just not working because they're great in the regular season. They take care of the cannon fodder in round one. And then when the big boys come to play in round two, something goes awry. So we'll see, but I'm genuinely stunned. It's 3-0 Rangers, but you know, if there were ever a team in these playoffs that could mount that comeback, it's Carolina. But at the same time, color me skeptical.
Probably not. I would be stunned if that happened. And Carolina, they're very much a quantity over quality team in terms of scoring chances. I think they might have to change the way they do things during the season next year, just because this style hasn't been working in the playoffs. If you give a good coaching staff and a good team the amount of time to prepare for them, they very easily get outmatched. And I'm saying that as someone who picked Carolina to win this series in 7 games. I'm looking like a complete idiot right now. And
I was right there with you.
My bracket is probably not going to be perfect anymore. But yeah, I'm stunned by that series. You have Dallas, Colorado. Again, that's Alabama, Georgia. And then 2 games tonight, Vancouver, Edmonton, game 2 in Vancouver. I love seeing the Green Men come back in game 1. Hope they're back again tonight. That's going to be an awesome game. And then game 3, Panthers, Bruins in Boston, 7 o'clock. Winner goes up 2-1 in that series. So those are the playoff games for tonight. But again, that'll, I think, do it for today's episode of the Locked On Penguins podcast. Thank you all so much for taking the time to listen to / watch this episode. Pat and I will be back with another show for you all on Monday. We'll continue some season reviews and react to any news that comes our way when it comes to the Penguins. But till then, for Patrick Damp, I'm Hunter Hodes. Thank you all so much for tuning in. We'll talk with you all on Monday.